Hi, everyone. I am here today to talk to us about the basic procedures we are going to use in our more daily activities. So when we're taking notes in my class, when you are doing warm-up discussions, um, I wanted to make it clear on how that is going to work for us. So as we start to enter those towards later this week or the beginning of next week, you already know what's expected of you, and we can just jump in without having to do a lot of the extra explaining. So first I did want to show you, you have a few choices this semester on if you would prefer to do everything on a notebook in front of you. By all means, that is welcome. And when it comes to note taking, research shows that's better. You are more likely to remember and think about your notes when you're having to take the time to write them down. However, I know that that can be a challenge sometimes, and with us moving towards having technology as a primary motive that we have, I wanted to make an online option for you available also. So I'm going to show you how both of those work, because ultimately what you're doing doesn't change. It's just going to change on where you're doing it. So if you're using a paper notebook, you are still going to lay out um, your notebook in a way that you're going to have a section for notes and a section for warm-ups. And if you would prefer to do warm-ups online, I'm going to show you the template that I've developed for that. So I'm sorry, that's the wrong screen. So here's your template for it. So what I want to point out to you is each day is going to have its own box. And so with each day having its own box, what I'm going to be asking of you anytime we do this, whether you're doing this on paper or whether you're doing this online, is that you are going to write down the questions we're asking. And the reason we have you do this is because these warm-ups and everything we're doing should be in your mind as a study tool also. So we're not just doing this as a work for the day, we're doing this as work for the day as well as ways for you to go back and review when it comes time for later tests, when it comes time for trying to put all the different pieces of history together, or even final exams at the end. We want to have this all in one place. And sometimes if all you do is write down an answer, you don't get a clear enough view. So that's why you see there are spaces for writing questions and answers down. So I'm going to break away from this template for just a moment. This is available to you on my course resources. So all you need to do is go into your Google Classroom and make a copy for yourself and save that as your world history warm-ups. And you do that just by clicking right up here where mine says Harris warm-up template. You will retitle that after you go to File, Make a Copy. And when you make a copy, it will put that in your Google Drive. And then you just change the name so it has world history warm-ups or psychology warm-ups, depending on which course you're taking with me. So from there, I want to talk about what the expectation is when we are actually presenting or when we're actually having a normal class. So I've laid out your procedures here. So when we come into class, once we get into warm-ups, you're going to see some questions already on the board and waiting for you. And this is going to be the same in our virtual classroom as well as it will be when we get back in person. As we walk in on the board, you're going to see some questions. So first, you're writing down the questions, as we've already said. Then you are going to try to dive into your own brain and answer those questions the best you can. And it's really important for your thinking skills to really try to come up with your best answer before you actually look for anything else. Now, you can use other resources on warm-ups. This is not a test. This is here to practice bringing that information back into your brain and making some of those connections and making sure that you have the information you were supposed to have from the previous class. So, but we always want you to start by thinking on your own. See what you can remember on your own. If you can come up with a great answer, that's a really good sign for your long-term learning. If you can't come up with an answer on your own, that's fine too. You can look back on your notes. You can go into the textbook, which is also on our course resources. You can ask friends if we can have a way to do that in our virtual classroom as well. But we always want you to try and see what's in your brain before you do that. If you get used to having to go to your notes right away, That's going to be a lot harder later on when you're having to come up with these answers without them. So ask for help, but please use the resources you can to come up with your best answer you can before we talk. So then we will discuss your answers with the class. We usually will call on you. We'll end up developing a system. Usually I use colored sticks with your names on them, and I may do that if I don't find another technological savvy way to do it. But we do randomly call, so you don't know when you're answering these questions if you are going to be the one who has to come up with that answer first. So we give you time. You have lots of ways and resources to come up with those answers. So what you need to know from us, if you come up with an answer and that answer is not correct, that gives me information. That helps me know what went wrong in the way that we're thinking about. And so if I'm seeing that you tried and you didn't get the right answer, that's okay. And I'm going to say this again. If you tried and you came up with the wrong answer, that's okay. What is not okay is if you come out and you just give me the like shoulder shrug or the I don't know, because what that's doing is saying you're not even willing to take the steps to try to find an answer. You could have sent a quick message to a friend. You could have looked back in the notes. You could have clicked open that textbook a little bit. And by you saying, I don't know, you're basically saying, I'm not even trying today. And so that's never okay. And so we want to see that good, solid effort. And if you're wrong, that's fine. The only catch is if you're wrong, when you find out you're wrong, make sure you get rid of that wrong answer so you don't go back and study it later and replace that with the correct answer. And so we want this to be as low pressure as it can be, but you are accountable for making sure you have an answer every single time we ask. So I wanted us to be real upfront with that from the beginning. You are responsible for having an answer at the beginning of every single time, and an answer that shows that you have made some attempt. I do like to remind you, you do have an academic responsibility section of your grade. Warm-up procedures are part of that. If you decide you are going to take a retake at any point during the school year, you also need to show me warm-ups, and we look for those being properly done also. People that take shortcuts on warm-ups might not do as well on the test later on. So we do require that you have done the warm-ups properly before you get a test retake. And if you haven't, that's going to be part of your requirements to be able to get the test. I also just like to remind you, I am very straightforward that these warm-ups are very often the foundations of my test questions. Sometimes they're just a straight copy and paste. So this is the foundation of the thinking we need for you to have to be successful in this class. And you get practice for this every single day. And so when you're taking advantage of the practice and you're practicing the way you should every day, you're going to be strong when it comes down to those test dates. If you take shortcuts through this warm-up process, those shortcuts will show up on the tests also. And so use this time every single day. You are given time in class anytime we have warm-ups to go back and study and practice writing some good test level answers. So when you do that, you're gonna get really good when it comes time for the test. So please take this procedure as seriously as you can to make sure that you are going to do awesome at everything else we're asking you to do in this class. So our next step, once we get past the warm-ups, a lot of times we're going to ask you to be taking notes. Very often in this virtual environment, this is going to be done through videos such as this one. When we're back in person, we might be doing some through videos, we might be doing some live. But my overall style, I try to keep consistent. And there's a lot of reasons behind the style that I've done. After 14 years of teaching, I've seen a lot of things that work and a lot of things that don't work. So what I wanted to show you next is kind of what you're going to see in my class and what I want you to do as you are paying attention. So what you're going to see on most days, and most of my slides are a little more pretty and a little bit with some pictures and color and stuff on them, but I just wanted to cut through a lot of that and just show you the structure. What I would like to point out on this particular slide is, if you notice, there's a big title. In this case, we're talking how Mr. Harris's notes work, but there's the main heading of what the content is. So if we were talking about the causes of World War II on this day, we also know on this slide, we're going to be talking about the impacts of World War II. And what you see here is a lot of blank space. I leave that blank space so you can start getting in the habit of really listening for those key ideas and writing them down as they come up. So when we're live in person, when you see that blank space, it's okay to ask me to repeat. And you're gonna hear me repeating a few times if these are these key ideas. When we are doing this through video, you can pause, you can hit that little 10-second rewind button on YouTube and be able to hear what that phrase was again as you're supposed to do it. And I'll still repeat it at least once on our YouTube videos also. So the way this is gonna play out is, as we're telling the story of what's going on in World War II, we're gonna talk about the causes. And so one of the major causes of World War II is the Treaty of Versailles. And you know the Treaty of Versailles should be with a cause because it's in that little bullet that's indented. It's inside of the causes and underneath it. And what I want you to see here, as we go to the Treaty of Versailles, you should know, you should be listening for 2 extra points about why the Treaty of Versailles is important, or something about it, or how it caused World War II. And you know there's 2 because there's 2 little dots, again, indented inside and underneath. We can also see there's 1 more big dot lined up at the same point with the Treaty of Versailles. And so that means there's really 2 causes of World War II that we're going to talk about on this slide. As we proceed, as you look down on the impacts, you should see that there's 4 big impacts of World War II that we're going to talk about, with one of them having one of those little subpoints with a little bit of extra information. And so as we're going through this, it's on you to make sure that you're really paying attention to what are these key ideas. You'll hear me slow down. You'll hear me repeat them. When I go into story mode, I start talking fast and I get excited. When we go into notes mode, I'll slow down and we'll talk about, oh, the Treaty of Versailles made Germany responsible for World War I. And then I'll speed up and talk a little bit about the story because it made Germany responsible for World War I. In which case that should be your cue. Oh, Treaty of Versailles made Germany responsible for World War I. I should be writing that down here. And please, if you have, we're not taking notes as of this right now. We're just trying to show you how they work. So by the time we get through all of this, you would end up with a slide that looks kind of like this in your notebook. You would have 2 big causes. You would have 2 little points of how the Treaty of Versailles led to World War II. And you're going to have 4 big points underneath. This would be, if we're typing, how it should be laid out. I want to show you a couple things 9th graders do that don't work. And they actually make it really, really hard to use notes. So as you look back over this, I want to point out right over here, it's really, really easy to tell the difference between the Treaty of Versailles and the 2 points underneath it. What some students will do is they ignore all that structure. And you end up with notes that look like this. This ends up becoming incredibly confusing and so hard to be able to go back and learn from. Because when you start looking at Germany being responsible for World War I, you don't know if that's its own cause or if that's related to the Treaty of Versailles. So don't do this. If you are one of those people that has been tempted to do this in the past, I'm telling you right now, you're setting yourself up for a huge struggle. And it makes things so much harder for me to help you later on also. Now I'm going to show you 1 step worse. Once again, don't do this, and really, really don't do this. You can see this example, they completely ignored all of the structure I've given them and are just randomly writing. If this ever happens in a notebook, I pretty much need to tell you we need to start over. And that's never a good sign to happen in a notebook, especially if we've been going for weeks or months before we see that this has been happening. So don't do this. It's very, very important. When you see these bullets on the slide, that your notes are matching up with those bullets. You will add your own, and that's good. So when you realize, oh, there's only 2 points, but it sounded like there were 3 things that were really important about it. Yes, write that 3rd thing down there too. Notes are a tool for you. The reason I'm structuring is to help guide you, but that's not an absolute locked in guide. Use your own stuff. You can make your own notes off to the side also. So there's 2 ways you can do this. You will see a template on the resources section of my website. on the Google Classroom, I'm sorry, on Google Classroom, there's a template for notes if you prefer to go online. If you prefer to do it on loose leaf paper, it's really important that you choose one side of the notebook to write on and only write on that side. So most people are right-handed. If you open up the spiral notebook and have that ring in the middle, you're only going to write on the right side of the page. Because with my notes, it's more than just taking notes in class. They're a tool to learn. And so we also need you to think about them and show evidence of that also. So my template has all this built in. So here we see that ring going right down the middle, and we see that we have used the right side of the page to take our notes. This particular example, they decided to write their own version of the notes over here that I highlighted in yellow to be able to make some notes for themselves too. And what I'd like to point out, at the time you are watching this video or the time you are sitting in class, this left side of the page is completely blank. And it needs to stay completely blank, because that's where we do our thinking, our processing, and your question asking for if you have any later questions. Again, this is a tool to help you study. And the whole point of this is to help make you the most effective student you can be. And there's a lot of research saying when you set up notes in a certain way, you're going to be more effective than if you set them up in other ways. So if you are taking notes in a spiral notebook, I have a template, and I would recommend, if you have a printer at home, print off that template. It will look a little bit like this image on your screen, and stick that in the notebook so you always know what you're supposed to do. If you are using my digital template and taking notes on the computer, all this stuff is already built into that template, so you won't need to do any extra printing there. So what I want to point out that you're doing here is everything here is after you've watched the video or after you've learned that content, then you go back through and you write down a few questions that would be good test questions. Those questions that really like cut down to what the main ideas were of that and would help you test yourself. I'm gonna tell you, since you haven't had many tests with me yet, you should really focus on hows and whys. If you start saying like the what questions, so what was the Treaty of Versailles, is not going to be a test question you get in my class. How did the Treaty of Versailles lead to World War II? That could be the type of question you would see. And so you should be thinking those how and why questions. And what you're going to do is right alongside your notes, you're going to write those questions in that left side of the page. So if we're doing that, here's your sample notebook. We're going to put those right here, and I want you to pay attention to, there's some weird spaces. That's because we wanted to write the question right by where its answer is across from it. And we do that so we can use this as a study guide, because what starts to become a really great study guide is if we flip that notebook and I can't see my notes, I can ask myself those questions. And if I can ask myself those questions and answer them well, I'm going to do awesome on the test. If I ask myself that question and I'm like, oh no, I don't remember the answer to that, it's right across from the question when you open that notebook back up. And so this is designed to be building a study guide for you every single day. So you're going to write a few questions. Generally, it's going to be 2 to 3 per like section of notes. But if you have a bunch or it's a really big day, do more. If it's a leaner day, there might be less, but generally don't go less than 2. So then the next step we saw, as you're looking back over your notes, what are the things that you don't understand? And those are going to go down in this bottom corner. So maybe you didn't understand, as we were talking about World War II, why Japan had to suffer by taking an atomic bomb when we were really trying to show off to Russia. And so if that's still confusing for you, you can write that down. And maybe our next class will answer that question. Maybe that would be something worth bringing up in our discussions the next time we meet, so that we can clarify that and you can make sure you have all those. Sometimes it can just be a straight, I'm confused about this. And so in this example, you can see I'm confused about how war helps the economy. That's a really important concept. And so again, if you're confused about those big ideas, bring those back to class next time, and here you are writing about them, because we all know you're not going to remember what those questions were when you're looking at it 2 or 3 days later the next time you see me in class. but when you write it down while you're thinking about it, it's going to help. And the last part is we're going to take everything we learned in that section and we're going to write a summary. Put that summary in your own words. Take everything we learned in that chunk of notes and that chunk of information and cut it down to just 1 or 2 sentences. And when you can do that, that shows I know what the big ideas are. I want you to notice as you're looking at this example, this should be in your words. Don't just rewrite the notes because the notes aren't there as the summaries. I mean, they're a summary of events, and now you're going to take those and summarize those even lower. So we say, like, after the war, America became awesome while Europe was all messed up. That's language that you're going to go back and remember because you wrote it down in your words, and that's really, really important. So again, you have that template, and that template is always there for you. I wanted to show you also the other template. So I need to change my screens here for just a second. So the other template for us to pay attention to, that did not show the appropriate screen, I'm sorry. Let's try it this way. So for those of you that are deciding that you would rather take your notes in person, on the computer instead of a paper notebook, this template is already here. So again, we just formatted it different. Everything's still there. We just had to flip-flop the review questions and the summary. And so everything is still here to remind you of everything we just talked about. And then as you scroll past page 1, we see the warm-ups are already there. And so you'll fill in your warm-ups for the day. And then you get down and there's a space to type my notes title, an essential question that we'll talk about as we get going. What are the dates of these notes and what unit are we talking about? And so once again, the notes are there. You're typing in the notes as we're going through and watching the video or listening in class. You have your space for review questions right next to it. And then you have the questions you're confused about and the summary at the end. So all of this is there to support you and make you awesome note takers who are doing it with a very open mind for learning. So as we are working through learning how to do notes, right away, you should commit to, for at least our first unit, are you going to do a paper spiral notebook or are you going to try to go all online? And so it's really important that you make it in one consistent place. I'd like to echo one more time, even though I've made this template for you, research does show that writing down information will help you more long-term. So I recommend using a spiral notebook still. If you want to go digital, that option is there for you in this new learning environment for you also. As always, I want this to be a tool for you. If you have questions about any of this, if you feel like you're confused about anything that we talked about, feel free to reach out. You all know my email address, my text now, and my office hours. So reach out if you aren't sure what you're supposed to be doing when we start taking notes, because I want to make sure that you are ready to roll and know exactly what's expected of you when we start, when that first warm-up screen shows up or when that first slideshow comes up where you're expected to take notes on. So thank you so much for your attention. Please reach out if you have any questions. I'm always happy to help you all out.